You know that moment when something is almost right, but not quite? A sentence that could have been clearer, a design that feels slightly off, a plan that works but could work better. And before anyone else says anything, your mind has already found it. The small inconsistency, the overlooked detail, the part that could be improved. It happens quickly, quietly, almost automatically. Sometimes you say it out loud, sometimes you don't. But either way, it's there. That constant noticing. And if you've ever tried to ignore it, you probably know how difficult that is. Because it doesn't feel like negativity, it feels like accuracy. Like you're just seeing what's actually there. But from the outside, it's often interpreted very differently. People call it being harsh or judgmental or hard to please. They might say you focus too much on what's wrong instead of what's working, that you make things heavier than they need to be. And over time, those interpretations can start to stick. But they don't quite capture what's actually happening underneath. Because this isn't just about attitude, it's a pattern. What we call being too critical is usually described as a tendency to judge or find fault. But there's more going on here than people realize. At a psychological level, this pattern often has less to do with negativity and more to do with how your mind has learned to create stability. Your brain is constantly trying to make sense of the world by organizing it, refining it, and reducing uncertainty. It looks for what doesn't fit, what could go wrong, what needs adjustment. And when that system becomes highly active, it starts to prioritize precision, clarity, accuracy, improvement. Not because something is broken, but because your mind has learned that catching mistakes early prevented problems later. So your system begins to lean into that. It becomes efficient at detecting gaps. And over time, that detection starts to feel like a baseline way of seeing. Neuroscience adds another layer to this. The brain strengthens pathways that are used repeatedly. The more often you scan for inconsistencies, evaluate outcomes, or refine details, the more automatic that process becomes. Eventually, it stops feeling like something you're doing, it just feels like how things are. But that lens, focused on what could be better, doesn't always turn off. It moves across contexts, into conversations, into relationships, into how you see yourself. And that's where the experience can start to feel heavier. Because the same awareness that helps you improve things can also make it harder to experience them as enough. If you trace this pattern back, it often connects to environments where precision mattered, where being careful made a difference, where mistakes had consequences, sometimes subtle, sometimes not. Maybe you were in a setting where expectations were high, even if they weren't always spoken directly, or where feedback came more easily than affirmation, or where being good meant being accurate, responsible, or ahead of potential problems. In those environments, your system learns something very specific, that it's safer to notice what's off before anyone else does, safer to refine than to risk being unprepared. And that learning isn't random, it's adaptive. It creates a person who pays attention, who anticipates, who sees layers others might miss. But it also creates a certain internal pressure. Because when your attention is trained toward improvement, it rarely settles. There's always another layer to adjust, another detail to refine, another version of something that could be slightly better. And that can extend inward. You start applying the same standard to yourself, not in a loud, obvious way, but in a quiet, ongoing evaluation. Was that the best way to say it? Could that have been handled differently? Why didn't that turn out the way it should have? And because this process feels logical, it can be hard to recognize how constant it is. It doesn't feel like self-criticism, it feels like thinking clearly. And it's important to understand, this way of being isn't better or worse than any other. Some people move through the world with a broader, more accepting lens. They prioritize ease over precision, flow over refinement. That doesn't make them more right, and it doesn't make you more difficult.
It just means your system learned to value different things. Yours learned to value accuracy, to notice the small things that shape the bigger picture. There's a kind of intelligence in that, a depth, a capacity to see what others overlook. But there's also a side of this that often goes unspoken. The more attuned you are to imperfections, the harder it can be to feel fully satisfied, because satisfaction requires a moment of stopping. And when your system is built to keep refining, stopping can feel unnatural, almost like something is being missed. That's the paradox. The very ability that allows you to improve things can also make it difficult to rest in them. And over time, that can create distance, not just from others, but from your own sense of ease. Because when your mind is always searching for what could be better, it doesn't always register what is already good. But none of this means something is wrong with you. It means your mind learned a pattern that once served a purpose, a pattern that helped you navigate complexity, that helped you anticipate outcomes, that gave you a sense of control in situations where control may not have been guaranteed. And even now, it's still trying to do that. That instinct to refine, that pull to correct, that awareness of what could be improved. It's not coming from a place of flaw. It's coming from a system that learned to stay ahead. And once you begin to see it that way, something softens. Not because the pattern disappears, but because it becomes more understandable. You start to notice that the voice pointing things out isn't necessarily the truth. It's a function, a process your brain runs because it's been practiced. And like any practiced process, it can become more flexible over time. Not by forcing yourself to stop noticing, but by recognizing that noticing isn't the same as needing to act on every detail. That clarity doesn't always require correction. That awareness can exist without constant adjustment. And not shift doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, in small moments where you realize that what you're seeing is one perspective, not the only one. There's more to this than just being critical, because the way you process the world shapes how you experience it. The way you notice, interpret, and respond to details influences how you relate to people, to outcomes, to yourself. And when you begin to observe that process, not to change it immediately, but just to understand it, you start to see something deeper. Not just the pattern itself, but the intention behind it. A system that was trying to help you stay steady, trying to make things better, trying to create clarity in a world that didn't always feel clear. And when you recognize that, the experience shifts from something that feels like a burden to something that makes sense. And if any part of this feels familiar, there's more to uncover in that direction. Not just about why you see things the way you do, but about what's underneath that way of seeing.